I guess these things were made popular a few years ago. Casey and I started using the 70D and the 80D for all his vlogging in New York City. Became pretty famous for it. And then Canon have followed up with the 90D, which some have said could be the last of the DSLRs from Canon. But I actually disagree. I think we'll see a few more, especially in the low range. But this is my review after 1 year, not just 1 year of a quick go of it, but a full year of using it. Video, photography, everything. It's been my base camera. One of the first things I want to look at is the build and design of the Canon 90D. I think it's awesome. Now the Canon 90D is considered a beefy camera, especially these days in the world of mirrorless. However, I do like the extra grip you get from the extra size. I really think it helps to get some stable footage, whether you're shooting handheld or doing your video and trying to get some slow-mo footage. Having that nice grip and that extra weight and actually adds value to the camera rather than takes away from it. I really do think it's pretty awesome. Very beefy, very chunky, but great to handle, great to hold. And it also comes in with that weather sealing, so you have water and dust resistance on the 90D, and so you should for the price point. I think you definitely would expect that. I've had it out in a fair bit of weather and never had any issues with it. Around the ocean too, where a lot of sea spray and that sort of thing. Never had any problems with it. I definitely think it's well thought out, especially with all the buttons and dials on the back. They're really handy for your right hand as you're using it. Your thumb can access all those dials and they can be custom set as well. Fair bit of customization available. So after a year, I have it set up perfectly for me. Most of my video recording, I have my custom function buttons all locked in and they serve me well. And I think once you figure out the best way to use this device, you'll figure out how to set it up that's the best way for you as well. I have to wear these sunnies. It's so hard to look at the lens and not the display. Now you do get on here a headphone jack, which is really handy, and some cameras don't have that, or if they do, you need a dongle, which is disappointing, but the Canon 90D definitely has it. It's really good. You do have the audio meters on the flippy screen now, so you can see what you're saying and if your levels are peaking. You have the flippy screen, which is great. I mean, I'm using it right now, although it is distracting to have it there while I'm walking and talking. Instead of looking at the lens, I always seem to be looking at the flippy screen. But flippy screen is a must, especially if you're going to be out vlogging like this. Even some of the video work that I do in the studio, filming B-roll, the flippy screen comes in really handy. And for the photography, I really like that optical viewfinder. For me, it's the best option. I don't know, call me old-fashioned, but I prefer the optical viewfinder these days. Currently, I'm using the 10 to 18mm lens on the Joby Gorilla Pod, and I have my stabilization, my digital stabilization, set to enhanced. Now I do use HDMI out as well when I'm recording in the studio. That's really handy to give me that nice big display, and it's nice to have that option here as well. Now we do have that top-down LCD display as well, which I find really useful for when I'm doing my photography. I think that's a standout feature. I'd use it more than I ever thought I would, and at first when I got it, I actually thought it was a bit of overkill and not necessary. But the more I do photography, the more I find it very helpful. So as you might be able to tell, I don't really have a lot to complain about the build and design of the Canon 90D. I think it just wins in so many areas. And if I was really going to pick things apart, I would say the mic jack is probably in the way of the flippy screen. Not by much. I mean, it just pokes its head in a little bit, which can be slightly in the way, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter. And for me, build and design, Canon 90D, it's one of the best cameras to use from a build and design, comfort point of view. Now, I should also mention that the 90D also has a headphone jack or a headphone port, so you can actually monitor your audio as well. I tend not to use it. Everything I've filmed on this video so far has been filmed with a 90D onboard audio, but through the Rode microphone, the little Rode microphone. I think for run and gun, the microphone and the audio isn't too bad. Another design feature that I really like is the SD card is accessible from the side, so not underneath. You can get to it whether you're on a tripod or not. And same with the battery. For most photography tripods and tripod heads, you'll be able to get the battery in and out without having to take it off the tripod, which is pretty good. Now, I should also mention that all today's filming has been done with an ND filter on. It's a Hoya ND filter. I think it's like 10 stops, something like that. I'll link it down below. It's not a very expensive one, but it gets the job done on the bright sunny days. Now I'm going to mention battery life right now. So I am going to be filming like this all day today. Photography, talking head video. Pretty sure I'll get that all done on one battery. Now I came from the Canon M50 where I had 3 batteries and I would still run out of juice. So the battery life on the 90D is awesome. You'll never whinge about it. I've got 2 batteries and I never ever run out. So it's just killer for the battery life. Now for the software on the Canon system, any Canon camera is going to be easy to learn and easy to navigate. It's just the way they've designed the software, and it is definitely the better software out of all the camera manufacturers. Now, like I always say, once you master a platform, it doesn't really matter, but in terms of ease of use, for me, it's just super simple, especially with all the buttons and dials on the back. They just make it so incredibly easy to operate, and to learn it was really quick for me as well. So I've been using them for about 3-4 years now, the Canon system, and it's just always easy, and you can go from mirrorless to DSLR, and there's no real big change in the software. Customize all the buttons in conjunction with that software, and you've just got a really easy, intuitive system that's easy to learn, which makes photography easier and more enjoyable. Now, I primarily use this camera for shooting landscape photography and doing my YouTube videos. So it's an all-in-one thing for me. It was a big expense for me, and so I have to rely on it to do everything. Now for the video, some people will say that there's better options out there for video, and there is. Like, you know, your X-T4, which I recently reviewed, has some great video features, and 4K 60 and F-Log and image stabilization, IBIS, and Canon doesn't have any of those. What you're looking at now is 25 frames per second, standard picture profile, 1080p. Now I can crank that up to 4K, but I don't feel there's a need to for this sort of video. In some of my reviews when I'm shooting B-roll, I do use the 4K, and I think it looks quite good. Now it also comes with 1080p, 50 frames per second. And 1080p 100 frames per second. Now that 100 frames per second gets pretty soft, but it is still there to use, and you can get some really good slow-mo with it. You just have to dial in your settings a bit better and pay a bit more attention to what you're actually doing. Whereas the 1080p 50 frames per second, or 60 if you're in America, is quite good, and I'm really content with the results of it, and I'll continue using it. So you can see throughout this video some of the B-roll and some of the product shots I'll throw in there. You can decide whether you think it's good enough, but for someone like me it is good enough. Some of the downfalls though are no IBIS. You've just got digital image stabilization, and if your lens has stabilization in it as well, then you've got that. But there's definitely no IBIS. I think that's a bit of a rort because other competitors have it at a similar price point. And no 4K 50 or 60 frames per second is disappointing as well. I think when this was released, even then I think it was time that they should have done it, and they didn't, and they've held off. And and you can get it in your Canon R6 and you can get it in your Canon R5. I think the autofocus is awesome. The colours are awesome. Colours look a bit off when I put this ND filter on, but when I'm shooting without the ND filter, the colours look great. Even now they look good, but the ND filter does throw it off. And that autofocus, I really dig it. I think for photography and video work, it's quite good. There is only 45 autofocus points on this, whereas like even the Canon M50 has 150 autofocus points. Isn't this place pretty? This is Lake Manchester, just outside of Ipswich. Well, I think it's even part of Ipswich. Now for photography, I use it mainly for landscapes like this sort of situation, and street photography. And then I just do my normally sort of family outings as well. And a few friends have asked me to do some photography for them as well at functions and stuff like that. And for the most part, the Canon 90D has got me out of a lot of trouble. Especially with that 32 megapixels, you can really cut in on your pictures to zoom in, and you do get an awful lot of detail in those 32 megapixels. So I'm quite impressed with it from a photography point of view. Again, especially for your landscapes, that's for me, that's my cup of tea. You can do a lot of wildlife photography with it as well because of that fast burst mode for taking photos. I forget how many, I'm going to put it on the screen, how many photos it can take per second. For wildlife, it's really good. You've got that fast shutter and you've got that high detail in the 32 megapixels. So it's really good, and there's plenty of videos on YouTube that will show you that from people that actually do wildlife photography. For me, it's landscapes, and you can see from my images that the landscape photography is really quite good. It holds its own, pictures are quite sharp, put it on a tripod and you get a nice stable shot any day of the week. Now for street photography, the Canon 90D is not the smallest camera on the market. In fact, you're not going to be sneaking this into your pocket anytime soon. Now the 90D does struggle once you get into low light situations, so you are going to need to consider that. If you're using this for low light video work or photography, you're going to struggle when it gets real dark. Now the Canon 90D does come with a lot of creative modes which are fun to play with, especially when you're out doing your street photography. They're good fun, and they're not going to make you or break you, but they're fun to have, and they add features to the camera that you otherwise wouldn't have. This is dreamy mode. Do I look dreamy? This is old movies mode. Does it suit the mustache? I think it does actually. Have a look at that. Looks beautiful mode. This is memory mode. It's supposed to give off the feeling that you're remembering this. Do you remember me? Do you remember me from a past life? This is dramatic black and white, like I'm thinking about something and it's dramatic. And this is recording in HDR mode. I guess it sort of looks HDR-y. I mean, look at the green across the road there. Oh, I like it. And they're fun to play with, especially if you like taking a few photos and then sending them out to people on social media. So you can connect your Canon 90D via Bluetooth or Wi-Fi straight to your phone, download your photos in JPEG mode, and then send them off to your social media of choice. So it's pretty handy, and I do that a fair bit when I'm out and about. Canon 90D I use for photography. My phone stays in my pocket unless I'm sharing images on social media. And as you can see from some of these photos, I was just out having lunch at the Retro Diner in Ipswich. Links down below if you want to check it out. But I was just having lunch there, and in low light with a nice prime lens, you can still get some good photos, but you're going to need a very sharp prime lens. I was using the nifty 50 f1.8, and I could keep my ISO quite low. Once you start bumping your ISO up above 1600, definite noise that is very noticeable. And I should mention that the noise or high ISO for video is pretty average as well. Again, around 1600 it tops out for me where it's getting too noisy. I definitely can't do any product review video work when my ISO is at 1600. About 800 is the max there that's acceptable for me. Just for the sake of it, this is me vlogging in 4K on the 90D. I'm wondering what you think. Is it brighter, better? Everything else has been 1080p except for the B-roll. So you tell me if you think the 4K makes much of a difference. I I think for stuff like this, it probably doesn't really matter, but there are times where you would want it. And if you do want to vlog in 4K, well, this is what it's going to look like. So if you're interested in picking up the Canon 90D, I definitely do recommend it. And if you're doing similar stuff to me, like photography, like landscapes, street photography and video work, then you're going to get a lot out of it too. Thank you for watching this video. If you made it this far, leave a comment down below telling me that I'm amazing. Just say, hey CW, you're amazing.